He's going to talk about the disaster preparedness at home and at work. As we all know, this is a very, very important topic. We all need to be prepared. And when I think of preparedness, I think of Chris. We've been friends for many, many, many years. And he always is available to come speak to us at a drop of a hat. So I would like to introduce my friend, Chris Riccardi.
Greetings. Everybody have their food? Everybody in a good place? Restrooms done? We're good? Well, feel free to get up and do whatever you need to do during the course of this. I don't take it personally. But I did just want to say thank you for having me back. I know some of you may remember my face from being here for events past. And I'm very grateful to be able to share information and be able to hopefully get you into a place of preparedness. It's always an honor to be here and to be able to share this information because, one, we never know if and when something is going to happen. You know, we used to say if it happens, or if this happens, if that happens. We live in a place where earthquakes are prevalent, and we have not had anything of significance in quite some time. Now, I'm not going to be Chicken Little up here and tell you that the sky is falling, but you should at least have tools in place to be able to sustain yourself for a period of time. And how long do you think that is? How many people say 3 days? 4 days? 5? A week? A week is good? How about 2 weeks? Now we're getting warm. And if you speak to the fire departments, the local fire departments, if we have a very large earthquake, they'll tell you that they won't even be able to get to your house to help you specifically for a good week or better. So if you're in a time of need, you're on your own. And understand that your neighbors will be in the same position that you are. So how do you get yourselves into a place of preparedness? Now, there are tools, and I'll go into a few different details to how to utilize your neighbors as well as part of your support system. And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But I just wanted to make sure that I said thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate being able to be here. I think some of you used to walk in the mall as well, if I remember correctly. I think a couple of the faces. And I was a guy there teaching you Tai Chi as well. So that's how I find my balance. It keeps me, how could I say, centered and in balance. I deal with a lot of things with hospitals, with emergency preparedness clinics, long-term care facilities, to make sure that the patients are safe in these facilities if something happens. This is a pretty extensive process. So as we go down this path, I'm going to show you ways to do this and accomplish this relatively simply, okay? So this doesn't have to be a bank-breaking event, but just to be cognizant of your planning and how you can do this with the most easy as possible. Because not everybody can go out and spend $500 on kits and this and that, but you can start to amass these goods every time you go shopping, just by picking up an extra canned good or an extra gallon of water or different things down those lines. And we'll work through that. So, I'm going to give a little quote from Benjamin Franklin, and this is my go-to when I do lectures, and I do get to speak around the country. We developed a really neat plan at the hospital, a little company in Torrance, that has been adopted by hospitals across the country. Pretty neat when it comes to emergency preparedness, to dealing with mass casualties. But when I speak, to start off with a bit of a reflection, Benjamin Franklin said, by failing to prepare, surely you are preparing to fail. And understand that. When we start going down this path, you see responses to hurricanes, to flooding. What is the first thing people say? Nobody's helping us. Well, what have you done for yourself? I'm going to ask that question. Now, right or wrong answers, but it's irrelevant at this point. But what have you done to prepare yourself? Hurricanes, you know they're coming. Tornadoes, you get 2 minutes, maybe if you're lucky. Earthquakes, what kind of warning do we get?
0.
Well, hang on a second. I'm going to give you a warning right now. We're going to have an earthquake. Consider yourself warned. How's that, fair? So put yourself into a place of preparing yourself to sustain yourself for a period of time. So we'll get into a couple of items that you should have in place, and one is to create an emergency plan. Another is to prepare. The other is the planning that you put into place as to what you would do if certain things happen. I'll show you a few other places you can get a little bit more information, available resources that are out there for you, and how you can tap into some of these items. So, as I mentioned, it can and it will happen here, okay? And as you'll see in the next picture, I'm sure this will hit close to home. This is the ExxonMobil explosion that took place a couple of years back. Actually, it's almost 3 years ago. This was pretty devastating. And I don't mean just devastating, the potential for harm was incredible. And I'm not even going to get into the chemicals that they store, on site, because that's another issue, and I think that takes further education as well. But what took place here was, I can't tell you how many pounds of asbestos got blown into the air. Okay? Blew all over the place. And 95% of the time, the wind blows from the ocean inland, right? But on this particular day, the wind was blowing in the opposite direction. So the parking lot at the hospital was full of dust and debris. We also had a bit of an issue in the hospital that we had to shelter in place in the hospital. Now, how many of you know how to shelter in place in your home? Now, what that entails is locking windows, sealing doors, shutting off your air conditioning units, making sure every window in your house is closed, and that you are able to stay in that place until it's safe outside. Now, we had a shelter in place. We had to shut down all the air handlers in the hospital because we have respiratory compromised individuals within our facility. If that particulate matter got into the hospital, you think that could have been a bad thing for the patients in the hospital? I do too. So we were able to respond quickly, effectively, and be able to manage that whole process. But the only reason why we were able to respond effectively was because we had a plan as to how we would go about this process. If you don't have a plan and you're walking around aimlessly going, what do I do? What do I do? Chances are things are not going to bode well for you. Okay, and that holds true with a fire, an earthquake. How many of you, without looking right now, know where the exits are in this building? Okay, now many of you are going to go out the back door because that's the way you came in. The others are going to try to get in through the front door. How about you go to a restaurant you've never been before? How many of you actually look for the exits? I do too. But you know that if there was a fire in that building, you're not going to be able to see the exit signs because there's going to be a layer of smoke in that room and you're not going to be able to see. So chances are you and the other 90% of that building are all going to try to crawl out the same door you walked in. That may or may not be the best plan for you when the exit could have been right behind you. Any of you do any air travel, cruise around? Good. How many of you actually look for the exits on a plane? I do all the time. Oh, that's a good one. Good answer. I appreciate that. And I say that because you have 90 seconds to get off a plane if a plane crash lands. 90, before that plane will potentially explode. 90 seconds. You better have a plan long before that hits the ground. With me, I sit in the exit aisle. Why? Because the door is right next to me. Right? I know that the door is right next to me. And I know that the folks that paid the extra $10 for a little extra leg room are really just sitting there for the extra leg room and will not necessarily be able to follow through with that evacuation process. So I sit right next to the window. I'll take a window seat and I'll sit right next to that door. Why? Because I know I'm going to open that door. That door will be open. Now, will I still be there by the time you get there? Probably not. I'll be waiting for you at the bottom of the slide and be able to help you to safety, okay? But I've accomplished the one thing is to get that door open, and I know that at least that will lead many to safety. A gentleman that works in the office building that I'm in now, I now work with an emergency management consulting firm. They are attorneys that work in the building with us. And when they realized the work that we did, he said to me, he goes, so if I see you running, I said, you better be right behind me. You don't panic, but make sure you're right behind me. So I'll be your canary in the coal mine, so if you see me running, you just keep on going with me. So now again, this never happens here, right? So this was an earthquake that happened not too long ago. This was the Northridge earthquake, right? Now this was, what, 20 some odd years ago? Maybe closer, getting close, right?
94 was.
94 it was. So now we had freeways broken, we had all kinds of things that were not operable. Now we happen to just get a good shake down here in this neck of the woods. But the folks up in Northridge, you know that 2 hospitals were damaged in that earthquake, that they were not able to see patients. Where would you go if the hospital that you usually attend or stop in to visit, where would you go? And how would you get there is another question. And we'll get into a couple of those little curveballs as well. So, how do you develop an emergency plan? Well, one is to educate your household on the dangers of fire and earthquakes, etc. Now, what does that entail? How many of you have functional fire extinguishers in your house? How about smoke detectors? Now you can get smoke detectors that are just one-time battery use and it ends and that's the end of it. But how many of you actually change the batteries in your smoke detector, before they beep at you? And I say that because by that time, they're no longer very good, operating very well. So now I'm going to ask this question. Flashlights in your nightstand? Beautiful. So if you don't change the batteries on your smoke detectors until they beep at you, when do you change the batteries in your flashlight? When you turn it on and it just goes, hey, right? I know. It's okay. You are not, this is not an isolated issue. This happens all over the place. We have the best of intentions and never carry through. I'm going to give you a little tip. Get yourself a couple of these glow sticks, those snap lights, and put those in your nightstand. Those glow sticks will light regardless of how old they are, past expiration. They just won't last the 12 hours that it says on the label. And that's something you can have access to. You never have to worry about changing the batteries on and be able to illuminate your path. There are also a couple of other really neat tools or items. And they're called power failure lights. And these lights are a plug-in to an outlet that has it just stays plugged in, doesn't illuminate, and when the power goes out, these light up. These are really neat tools to be able to guide your path, to get out, to be able to see in the dark if you had to. We had a power failure recently. One of the transformers went out over here at south of Bishop Montgomery High School, and all the power went out in the house, and it just went black, and then bam, the whole house lit up because all my power failure lights went on. My wife said, "How did you do that?" I said, "Just having a good plan." I said, "You are married to an emergency preparedness person." Just thought I'd let you know that in case you forgot that over the last 13 years. So, now, how do you respond to each event? Well, what if it's a fire? How would you respond to a fire? You have fire extinguishers. Would you go for the fire extinguisher? How do you know to put it out, not put it out? We use well, 911 is always a good one. But we use an acronym. It's called RACE, okay? And that is rescue, who you can, sound the alarm wherever that is, whether it be to 911, contain the fire, so if it's behind a door, close that door, hopefully not with you, the folks that live in your house with you, but close that door and then either evacuate or extinguish the fire. How do you know which one to do? I try to explain to folks, treat a fire like a bully. If you're bigger than it, knock it down. If it's bigger than you, run away, okay? And that'll help with the decision-making process. Because if you have to sit there and wait to wonder what to do, whether you're having an earthquake, there's a fire, or I do a lot of training for active shooter processes. If you hesitate, we have a little adage, and that is, he who hesitates dies. Now why? Because you're not responding when you should. How many people would wait while you're shaking going, wow, is this an earthquake? Right? How many times? I mean, even me, I wish I could say that never happened to me, but I'm not above reproach. There are times where I look at the chandelier to see if it's swinging to let me know. That's my canary, is that chandelier swinging. Then I know I need to get under something, right? So if we were going to have an earthquake, what would you do right now? We're having an earthquake, let's say, where are you going? Under the table. We have quite a few folks in this room. There's limited table space. There may be some natural selection taking place here. Right? So, what about a power outage? Now, these are things that do happen at any given time. It doesn't take an event, a major event for that to happen. It could be a car accident, it could be a power surge for this to take place. How many of you have a backup generator for your house? I know Kurt does. We had a nice little chat about that. Do you know how many of you have a car? So basically, you have a generator in your garage, okay? Now, what I'm saying with this is it's not going to run your household. It's not going to keep your refrigerator, the food in your refrigerator good, but you can charge a cell phone. You can charge your concentrators if you had to. It won't last long, but at least you have something as a backup plan. Now, which brings me to another point. If you do have an O2 concentrator, what is your backup plan? Just tanks? I'm asking that question. I cannot give you a definitive answer.
My oxygen company gave me a 48-hour emergency tank, so that's our backup.
That's a good plan, and that's a great point, yes.
I've got 2 electrical batteries and 4 tanks.
External batteries that are not hooked up to power.
4 tanks.
Beautiful. But you see, now that's a plan. That's having a plan in place as to what you would do in your time of duress. Yes, sir?
How about devices that generate your own power?
And he's made the comment about devices that you can generate your own power, basically hand cranks and various things like that. That would help for lights and whatnot, but it may not be able to crank up enough of a charge to be able to backfeed your concentrators. So make sure you have a backup plan. We all rely on oxygen, but there is a greater need for most of the folks in this room. Make sure you have a backup plan. Make sure you have escape routes out of your house. You know you're either the front door or back door. What if the fire is in the hallway where you can't get out of your bedroom? Do you know how to get out of your bedroom? How many of you are on the 2nd floor? How many of you have a rope ladder? Or hopefully a very fluffy, bushy bush under that window, so if you have to jump, at least it'll give you something to land in. Sorry, I'll try to make sure I stay on. How many of you know how to shut off your water and gas? How many of you know how to shut off your next door neighbor's gas? Why do we worry about things like that? Because if there's a gas leak, fire, and their house blows up, what's going to happen to yours? You're pretty much level 2. So just thought I'd throw this stuff on out there. What I mean, when you start to plan with your neighbors, there's a way to do this. There's a program called Map Your Neighborhood, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. What this is a program that brings your block together or your apartment building together to discuss resources that you may have in your house or on your block. You may be across the street from a plumber. You may have a firefighter. You may have a police officer that live right on your street, a nurse, a doctor, that may be able to assist you in your time of need. But how do you plan with your neighbors? Because remember, not everybody's going to necessarily have all the food they need, all the water they need, but if collectively you can bring that together and be able to assist one another. And by doing so, there's strength in numbers. They'll be less likely to come and try to loot your house when they know you have goodies in it, and to be in a better place of preparedness. Now, some really neat programs are out there, so get yourselves involved, get yourselves educated as to how to do this. Instead of having a Tupperware party, you can even do this over a couple of bottles of wine, whoever won the wine. Where's the wine winner? Right? It's a neat way to get everybody together to have these discussions, right? So, how would you be able to respond? One of the things that I was amazed at moving to California, obviously I didn't come from this side of the country, it was the amount of people that didn't know their next door neighbor. No knowledge, they're lucky to get a wave. right? This amazes me. Who better to help you than your next door neighbors, the people across the street from you? So we have a little plan at my house. Obviously, my house is pretty well stocked for the event of a disaster. But myself and my wife, who's a nurse at the hospital, would be at the hospital to assist with any kind of mass surge. So,
spare key for me?
I'm not going to tell you where it is, but I'm going to let you know that there is a plan that I have, because I also have 3 cats, okay? My next door neighbor is, there's 3 generations of women, grandma, mom, and a child. So I let them know where my food is, and where that key is to get to it if they need it, because I don't want them scaling a 6-foot wall to get there. I didn't build a wall that was already there. Just putting it out there. So they know if they need to tap into any of the food and water in my storage, that they can get it. All I ask of them is when they're at my house that they look after the cats. It's a fair deal, right? Because we're going to be tied up. We're going to be working on patients, folks that have been injured, and working through this process. So this is a plan we already have in place so that I know something happens, we're covered. And they are too. Do you have out-of-state contacts to notify if something happens to you? Now this is old school kind of mentality when we're using landlines to communicate, because they will be backed up. Same thing's going to happen with cell phone services, if we're lucky enough to have a cell phone service. Do you know how to text? I say that because my grandmother used to tell me, don't freaking text me, right? And I appreciate that. You give me a phone call. And I appreciated that, and she did, I'll just leave it at that. That's as extensive as her F-bombs got. But she meant it. So how would I communicate with my grandmother? Well, again, it would be a phone call, but I may not be able to. Can I send her a message that she'd be able to read even without being able to access that? Absolutely. She won't be able to respond to me, but at least we can add some guidance. So landlines are still a good tool, but make sure you know the different avenues that you can use on your cell phone. You can email, you can text, you can call. Okay? So just know how to use that little device that you have in your pocket, and it may be the thing that saves you. So keep copies of your family information, your insurance information. Do you know that there are folks from Katrina that it took them almost 3 years to get any type of insurance reimbursement because they couldn't find their documents? And they couldn't validate who they were, especially people with common names, John Smith or Bob Miller, right? You tell somebody, oh, my name's Bob Miller. How many other Bob Millers were involved with this, or Joe Smith, whatever that may be. So make sure you have copies of these documents, and maybe even prescriptions or other assorted goodies. Do you have a list of your medical record so that if something happened, people know how to access, you can access some of this information? And make sure it's in a waterproof Ziploc bag in a waterproof container, right? These things will come in handy for you. There are little kits and tools that the fire department give out, and that's to put your medication into these little jars and whatnot. How many of you have, besides what your prescription says for the month, have an extra 7 days worth of medication in your... Now, how did you get that medication? Well, never mind. I'm not going to ask that question. So, I'm going to give you folks a little tip. If your insurance company won't pay for that prescription for your extra 7 days, talk to your doctor, because they usually have samples, and they'll be happy to provide you with samples if that's what it's going to take. And let them know you're going to put this in your disaster kit. They may even prescribe it to you so it'll reduce the cost for you as well. Okay? So, yes?
Yeah, a little tip that I know is all that information that you're talking about, saving your insurance,
Yes.
documents and all that stuff, what I did was I emailed it to myself. I scanned it in and I emailed it to myself. And then that way, because it goes to email, I have Yahoo, it goes up in the cloud.
Right.
If something happens.
At least you can access it from somewhere else.
Right.
That's a great plan. Did you all hear that? One of the backup plans was to scan in your documents and email them to yourself. And if you have some cloud storage or whatever the case, so if you're at Aunt Matilda's house in Arizona after you vacated Los Angeles after the earthquake, you can access that from their computer, right? And now you'll have access to your documents. That's a great plan. But make sure, and spare cash, et cetera, et cetera. Couple of $100, small bills, okay, that's not for ransom. But that is just in case you do have to go out and buy stuff and there's no power in our area, and your credit cards don't work, your ATM card doesn't work. If all you have are $20 bills, you go to buy a half a gallon of water, guess how much it's gonna cost you? $20. You got a couple of bucks in your pocket, you may be able to work out a deal. So I was mentioning about Superstorm Sandy. Right after Superstorm Sandy hit in New York, this sign came up. Okay, and what it says is, where are you, FEMA? FEMA is not a response agency. They're not coming to help you. They'll come and support the city, they'll come and assist in the larger scale event, but they are not 911, okay? And I say that because people have this expectation that, oh, when something happens, they're gonna be here in no time. I'm just saying, prayer helps. But FEMA will be there eventually, but not necessarily to come to your house, okay? So make sure you have a good plan. So what kind of stuff can you prepare? Well, how about develop an emergency supply kit that includes water, at least 1 gallon of water per day per person. How many of you have that? How many of you have pets? You have extra water for them too? I make sure that you do, okay? Now you're going to have a half gallon of water for consumption. The other half gallon of water is going to be for hygiene. You're going to need to be able to keep yourself clean and working your way through that. Okay, and those wipey things, all they do is make more of a mess. I'm just letting you know that. And so make sure that that can be a backup plan, but try to have some water to keep yourself golden. Make sure you have food, 7 days worth of non-perishable food. Now, most of you probably have a week's worth of food in your facility already, in your home. Now, what I mean by that is you probably have perishable goods, right? In the fridge, in the freezer. What would you eat first?
Freezer.
Go for the perishables. Go for whatever you can. And if you have a means to cook this, like a barbecue or something along those lines, if you cook it, it may last you an extra day or so. Okay? So, and keep your refrigerator and freezer closed as long as you can, because that'll help maintain some of the items in there at a temperature. Once it starts getting too warm, things start to go bad, and then you're going to have to get rid of it. So if you're able to consume whatever you can in the fridge first, on the first day. Second, what else? What are you going to eat next? The stuff in the freezer, because now it's defrosting. Now we need to eat that, otherwise it's just wasted. Then you get into your canned goods and your dry goods as to what you would eat next. But make sure you have a plan as to how you would deal with that. Now, I barbecue, we camp as well, so there's always tools to cook. There's always an extra place to sleep if I needed to, just by grabbing my tents, sleeping bags, if we actually couldn't stay in the house and had to sleep out in the backyard. And then with the barbecue, I could at least cook food as needed. Now, when I tell you to stock up on canned goods or things like that, don't buy things you would never eat on a good day. Right? And I really mean that. Like, I know some folks are big Spam fans, others cannot really tolerate Spam. Or those little Vienna sausages, right?
Ooh.
See? Now, if you would need them on a good day, why would you want to store those in they'll last a long time, but why would you want to eat that? You're dealing with enough stressors as it is. Why do you want to eat something that it's going to make matters worse? So make sure you have a means of taking care of business. Yes?
If you were,
I'm coming around this
to
side.
use your barbecuer and all of a sudden we had another little earthquake, what if it tipped over?
That's a good question. Many of the barbecues that are built are very sturdy. The issue you're going to run into is if it's a gas barbecue and that's all you have access to, because then you only have that tank, right? But it can tilt. But chances are, something of that size, it's got a wide base that it'll pretty much stay upright where needed. If it's only on two little legs, then you may have a problem, okay? But that's a good thing. And remember, aftershocks are definitely something you need to be concerned with. So as the building's shaking, get yourself drop, cover, hold on, and as the shaking stops, starts working your way out the door. Yes, sir.
Chris, what's the best estimate for the length of time that we might be without electricity when the big one hits? I know that's a really wild, tough question.
It's,
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
well, Puerto Rico's still without power, right?
Yeah,
Superstorm Sandy, which was a hurricane that came up the coast, knew that it was coming, they were out without power for 12 days on Long Island. 12 days.
what's the estimate for LA?
It could be months, okay? Months. Months. At least one, if not more, right? Because you have to remember, all of our, like our services, utilities, now the grid can get knocked out, but the grid requires certain fuel and various other things to keep this stuff running, right? So where does our water and fuel lines and pipelines, how do they get into the LA basin? They come over the Cajon Pass. Do you know why it's a pass? Because of earthquakes that have shaken and cut this little swath through the mountains. Okay? So what makes you think that after the shaking happens, that those pipelines are going to be intact? No. And we'd be selling ourselves a false bill of goods if we start working down that path. Now that's one of the reasons why if we do have a major earthquake, shut off your water immediately. Now why would you do such a thing? Because that'll keep any contaminants from getting into your water supply, in your house. Now where can you find water in your house? Let's go with the toilet tank, Jackie. She said bowl, but maybe the animals are already drinking from there anyway. But the toilet tank, unless you have the tidy bowl man in there, is consumable water, as is your water heater, okay? How many of you went to tankless water heaters? You got instant hot water, but you got no backup. Just saying. At least it's cozy instantly. But understand that there's always a drawback to certain things. Certain decisions we make, there could be consequences. So what about evaluating your home, your emergency supplies? Do you have them all in one place? Do you keep all your eggs in one basket? Make sure that they are strategically located around. Fire extinguishers, make sure that they're still good. Check the gauges on them periodically. Another neat tool to do with fire extinguishers, especially the ABC ones that are chemical, is just a powder in there, shake it. And if it feels like a big lump going from one side to the other, chances are it is a big lump going from one side to the other. And if you needed to use it, it won't work. Okay? So a nice way to check your stuff, again, yes?
About a year ago, they came out with a bunch of the extinguishers didn't work, were expired and didn't show the correct date.
Question was about fire extinguishers that were expired or didn't show the right date. There are gauges on them, and there's an arrow that'll go into the green or into the red. So even if it's charged and it's old, like I said, you're going to feel that lump bouncing back and forth. It's still not going to work. So make sure that you replace these things periodically, and how often, it just depends on where you keep them stored. Are they hot? Are they cold? Do you keep one in the kitchen? Do you keep one in the garage? Where do you keep these things? And make sure that they are intact. And quite honestly, you should check them at least monthly. Now, I know that's a lot of work, but at least you'll know that if in your time of need, you go to reach for something and you pull that handle, it's going to work. So again, just a little backup plan, because we do a lot of planning for earthquakes and various other things. But the most common issue that we're going to deal with in any household is a fire. Okay, make no mistake. Do you know how many structure fires take place in the United States every year? 750,000 structure fires. Now that's buildings, houses. This is pretty incredible, and especially around wintertime when folks are using a little space heater, things get a little too close to the gas heater as well. Okay, that's flame. That's an open flame that, well, covered in a box, but it's still a flame. That dust gets in there with heat, starts moving stuff around. Those are embers.
Christmas trees?
What's that?
Christmas trees.
Christmas trees as well, absolutely. And most of the time, you know, you see folks buying them early. By the time it gets to Christmas, they're already dried out. Now it's just tinder. Okay, you get a short in one of those your Christmas lights. Now you have a fire. And there's a neat video on YouTube. It's from the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. Okay, If you look as to how fast a Christmas tree can light up and cause that house to burn down, the whole room and fire to within seconds. I mean, we're looking at under 30 seconds for this fire to consume a house, or at least a room that tree was in. 30 seconds. That's pretty impressive. Now, what happens if your smoke detector goes off while you're sleeping? Where are you going? What are you doing? Gonna jump up out of bed and go fan it with the dish towel like my wife does, right? Absolutely not. If that smoke detector goes off while you're sleeping, don't even sit up in bed. Do not sit up. Roll out of bed, get down to the floor, and go find out what's going on. Why? Because if you can hear the fire alarm going off, that means you're still alive. That's number one. That means you're under any layer of smoke that may be in that house. As soon as you sit up, you just stuck your head up into it. Now, fire doesn't kill you. It's the smoke inhalation that will. So roll out, find out what's going on. Okay? Just food for thought. What kind of risks do you have in your neighborhood? Are you near a refinery? Are you near a gas station? Are there other pumping stations nearby your home? Chemical plants, right? Make sure it went through the shut-off valves, and then exit routes from your home. Not only from your house, but how would you get out of your neighborhood if you had to? Now, how many of you have driven on the 405 at any day, at any time? It's a parking lot, right? It doesn't matter what day it is. Now imagine increasing the number of cars on that freeway 100-fold. Where are you going? Nowhere. You better have a plan to sit tight, hunker down, and be able to sustain yourself. Because there's two problems with you evacuate to another location. One, do they know you're coming? And two, do they have enough supplies to accommodate you when you get there? I don't know. I can't answer that for you. In speaking with Kurt, I know he's got an escape route, and it definitely involves water. And I think that's not a bad plan. If you can get to it, you're in a good place. But make sure that you have a plan. What is your initial plan, and then have a backup plan. Okay? I don't know if he's got enough room for everybody. So what type of emergency supplies do you need? Well, obviously a first aid kit. Many people will get involved with dealing with CPR classes. Well, if something happened, and it's going to take a week before 911 can get to you, right? How long can you sustain doing CPR?
Not very long.
Not very long at all. The longest I've done CPR was an hour and a half. And I was done, okay? An hour and a half. Now, and that was with one other person. We were able to switch off. We were done. So understand that. Again, have a first aid kit, because your biggest issue is going to be able to wrap a wound or take care of business. How many of you have lived in California for longer than 1 year? Pretty much everybody. How many of you have closed-toed shoes under your bed that you can put on and walk through all of the glass that's broken from the windows and the TVs? That's, judging from everybody that has lived here for a while, there should be no excuse that there are no shoes under your bed. The biggest injury after an earthquake is cut feet from people walking on glass. So now you cut your foot, you have nothing to take care of it, the fire department can't get to you, you can't get to a hospital for at least a week. What do you think is going to happen to that foot? You may end up losing that foot if you don't have the equipment to take care of that. But why even need the equipment to take care of a cut foot if you can put a pair of shoes under your bed? Right? Now, I don't know what you sleep in, that's none of my business. But if you do, depending on what you do sleep in, make sure you keep some clothes next to your bed too that you can slip into before you slip out the door. I just say that because there are some things we can never unsee, right? And you may get to know your neighbors a whole lot more intimately than you ever desired to do so. So what about a particle mask? And especially for folks with, folks who are dealing with COPD, respiratory issues, do you have a particle mask? Because there's going to be a lot of dust. How do you put an N95 mask or a surgical mask over your nose and face? I don't recommend a surgical mask. I would recommend an N95 mask because that'll filter out a whole lot of particulate matter. You don't want to be inhaling that stuff. What's that?
What is an N95?
It's just a rated mask. It's a cone mask that fits over your face.
Cone?
It is, with rubber bands that'll attach it to your head. You can find them at Home Depot. You can find boxes of them in the tool section, painting areas where you would be dealing with dust and such. Yes?
Can you use it with the oxygen?
You can put it underneath if you needed to, I'm sure. You can modify that to suit. So, make sure you have something to wash your hands with. Yes, sir?
There's one thing that in your neighborhood you should look for, and that's a radio amateur, because he belongs to CERT. He
Yep.
has emergency communications and several other things that are available to you.
And that's a great point. Are there any ham radio operators in this room?
Archie.
I am as well.
And Kurt, and Kurt.
And Kurt. Well, Whiskey 6, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot.
Katie
Yes, the
6.
FCC gave me that call sign.
86 ATJ.
Nice. See? So these are ways of communicating with the world at large when all other means of communications have failed. After Katrina, the one thing that worked after Katrina, ham radios.
And how do you find the ham radio operator in your neighborhood?
Look for the big antenna in the backyard. And make no mistake, there are many. And I'm fortunate that I've had some great guidance working with the hospitals as well. Yes, sir?
Some walkie-talkies at a very long range.
Walkie-talkies can help you out long range, but that means somebody on the other side of that walkie-talkie has a walkie-talkie on the same channel as you. And that's really, just make sure that there are means. Like when we installed the walkie-talkies at the hospital, the repeater system, we made sure that those walkie-talkies would work at the City of Torrance Emergency Operations Center, that they worked at the secondary site over at the airport, Torrance Airport, and that we were able to communicate with each one of our off-site buildings via radio, because if worst case scenario, we needed a means of doing so. Our backup plan was satellite phones into ham radios as well. So know that there are tools out there. So make sure you have alcohol wipe gel to be able to keep yourself clean, wash your hands, because you're going to be eating. And God only knows where your hands will be and how you're managing that. And remember, what goes in was going to come out. So how do you manage that? Okay? Where do you have a shovel? Can you dig a hole in your backyard? What's going to work for you? Now, I don't mean to go down this path, but you need to have a means of getting rid of waste as well. And quite honestly, you're basically fertilizing your tomatoes for next year, right? And what I mean by that, you're cutting out the middleman, because when you flush your toilet here, it goes to the Kellogg treatment plant, right? Over here on Sepulveda and the 110 freeway. Now, there, they take whatever flushed to them, dry it out, treat it, and then put it in a bag. So if you garden like I do, you go to Home Depot or Lowe's and you go buy a bag of fertilizer or amend. Where does it come from? Kellogg. Guess what you just bought? Right? So you're cutting out the middleman. Just take care of your business and put it where it needs to go. Saving you money already.
I know we got one, but there are places like Depot, I believe Home Depot, they sell survival kits.
Right?
And they provide a lot of the things you're talking about.
This is true. There are pre-made kits you can buy. Lowe's has them, Walmart has them. There's a couple of sites online like Blue Monster Prep that'll make the kit of your choice. The Red Cross has them online as well. And these come already pre-assembled. These are great Christmas gifts to your family members to put one in your car. Is it? Uh-oh. You're good? No, please. It's quite all right. Take care of business. Are you okay? It's with these kits, but just remember, like buying a first aid kit that's already made for you, how much money do you want to spend on aspirin and ibuprofen? Because that's what's in there, or Band-Aids. If you need a first aid kit, you need to know how to do a tourniquet, you need to know how to make a sling wrap, how to make a splint if you had to. Not necessarily just so I can have a bag full of aspirin. And I say that, so when you purchase these things, identify what you need in there, and you may be able to buy a complete kit. Like I bought a kit for myself, but I also enhanced it by bringing, by utilizing like meals ready to eat. These are boxed meals that I keep in there. There's a couple of pair of underwear in there and a couple of pair of socks as well. Now, why do I want something like that? Well, my pants, I may be able to get away with a week out of a pair of pants. A couple of days with a shirt, maybe a few more if I need to. Won't have many friends, but then I don't have to share my food, if I'm in the same shirt. But if I'm able to change my underwear or socks a couple of times, this is going to be worth its weight in gold, right? So just make sure you have a good plan. Sleeping bags at your home, watches, how you're going to be able to tell time if you need to. Does it matter? I don't know, but just make sure you have a means. And then have a first aid manual to some degree or another. So we'll keep going. How many of you have canned goods? Stocked, stored, okay? How many of you have a can opener to go along with it? How many of you can openers are electric? Kind of have a little bit of a problem now, don't we? At least as long as you have a hand one. Again, the pet food, make sure you have extra pet food, water for your pets. Deal with little kids, and this is another good one. Sometimes your baby food will last quite a long time in jars as well. So you may be able to stock up on some baby food. Your medications, again, as I mentioned with the cash. Traveler's checks, I don't know if anybody even takes those anymore, but that was a directive of FEMA. Yes, sir.
I would also recommend a radio that can get powered by hand.
Right.
Because that's your communication there.
Sure, and make sure that you're able to tune in to radio stations as well, because that's how you're going to get information. And there are crank radios that by cranking it, charges it, and you'll be able to receive AM and FM messages. How many of you know what station to turn to if we had a disaster in this area? KNX 1070 is our emergency radio station. Okay? Make sure you tune into that. Because guess what's not working is your TV, and you're going to be waiting for a message to come across a TV that doesn't work. Okay? And you change your clothing, paper plates, things to eat off of. So we'll get into some planning stuff. Again, how would you evacuate? Would you evacuate? Have a good plan to shelter in place. What is a hazard in your home, in your own home? How many of you have a picture hanging over your bed? Is it mounted very well? No? Because if the earth shakes, that picture's coming down. Who's it going to hit? You. Don't have a window over your bed, because windows break and you're going to be under glass. There may be high items that can fall. Big cookie jars, nice things, ornamental kind of a thing. That's going to get you into some trouble. So what about loose shelves, loose shelving? You know, there are some things you can put on your cabinets, these kid-safe locks that you can tap onto your cabinets. They're cabinet locks to keep dishes from falling out when everything else is shaking. Okay? China cabinets, these are things that can stay intact if you use the right tools. And is your water heater secured? Is it strapped to your beams on your house? And I ask that question because if it's not, that's the thing that's going to fall over, and then you're going to lose 25 to 50 gallons of water. Yes, ma'am.
For the people who are very secure having generators, my brother lives in Puerto Rico, and the first thing that happened to them is they couldn't get gasoline to go in the generator.
Correct.
Yeah.
Once they got the gasoline, the generator broke down, and then they couldn't get the parts. So don't rely too heavily, especially people like you, on I have my backup, because, and also his mother-in-law generator was gas, not gasoline, but gas.
Right.
They couldn't get any gas, even to the hospital.
And these are problems. So if you have a generator, do you keep extra gas? Can you store gas in your garage? It becomes a fire hazard there too. Right? So you have to be careful as to how far you go with that. But when you know that hurricane is coming, that's when you fill up a couple extra 5-gallon barrels of gasoline and store them in your garage. Yes, ma'am?
They have battery-operated generators now.
Battery-operated generators as well.
Where do they sell them?
Check, again, check online. These are all, Harbor Freight has stuff, you got Granger has other assorted items. Okay, so closed-toed shoes under your bed, I mentioned the glow sticks, extra clothing, and make sure that it's right next to your bed so you can slip into it. So if you're planning on evacuating after an earthquake, you guys remember what the after Northridge earthquake looked like?
Yep.
The freeway? How far do you think you're gonna get?
Not too far.
So make sure you have a kit in your car. If you're gonna keep a kit anywhere, keep it in your car. Why would you do that? Because your car is usually where you are. So you need bottled water, non-perishable food, first aid kit, jumper cables, blankets, flashlights, batteries, flares, fire extinguisher, and some spare clothes. Okay? So, for further education, I'm just going to run through this, is to enroll in a CPR first aid class. The first aid I'm emphasizing. Make sure you know how to take care of business. How many of you know how to apply a tourniquet? Because if something happens, that you're able to use this and ensure that that person doesn't lose a life, let alone they may lose a limb, but they won't lose their life. Take care of an emergency response course. We were just talking about CERT. This is your community emergency response teams, and they go through extensive training with you, minor search and rescue, etc., etc. They have free courses in your cities. Again, if you're really enthusiastic, EMT courses are really neat. Your earthquake and disaster preparedness programs, and a Map Your Neighborhood program, as I had mentioned to you before. Okay, one more thing. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of homework. On your way home, or how about even on the way here, how many things did you drive over or under to get here? How many things on your daily, day-to-day basis do you drive over or under? Overpass, underpass? Do you even know if you're on an overpass?
No.
Okay? Because that's all points of failure on your travels, okay? So make sure, practice your fire drills, and who's going to take care of your family if you can't get home? Make sure you have a plan. And here are a bunch of resources for you as well. You have ready.gov, which is a FEMA site. California Office of Emergency Services. Again, FEMA Direct. Be Prepared California. And NOAA, which is the National Weather Service, that will be able to provide you with information, etc. Questions? Yes, sir. The statements.
Do you recommend fuel tank
What kind of fuel tank?
for the car? Gasoline?
Well, if you have extra fuel, here's something I'm going to tell you. Don't ever let your tank get below a half tank.
Right.
Okay? Ever.
Ever.
Because if you do, if you let it drain, now you no longer have access to be able to charge your cell phones, various other electrical devices from your car. Remember what I told you, your car can be a generator to generate light electricity for you. Okay? At least to be able to charge the devices you need to communicate. You can also charge a ham radio, right, with a handheld ham radio. So maybe you have a battery backup, I don't know. But make sure you have a plan and then a backup plan. Yes?
Do we have a reverse 911 in this area? And if so, what does that actually tell us?
What it does is let you know if you needed to shelter in place or an evacuation. We do. And if any of you are involved, make sure you get yourself hooked up to Torrance Alerts. Torrance Alerts is a great system. You sign up for this, they'll email you, text you, and reverse 911 only works with basically with landlines that may still be connected. Although now they're starting to work through the VoIP or like Vonage or some of the
Is it 119 then?
No. They call you instead of you calling them. That's reverse 911. It's not 911 in reverse. It's just them calling you. Yes?
So does each city do that, or the fire departments? Or?
Most of the cities do, and it's usually through your emergency services within the city. Go online, find out if they have a mass communication process. Folks, I'm going to have to run, but I wanted to say thank you very much, and I hope you found this to be helpful. Sorry to scare the pants off you.
Hey, let's give a big round of applause for Chris. Thank you very much, Chris. So Chris gave you a lot of great information. Hopefully you act on even 1% of his recommendations. It'd be a good idea. So please drive home safely. Hopefully we'll see you at the gym, the PEP gym. And if we don't, we'll see you at the next luncheon. Thanks, everybody. Have a good time. I told him already. Huh? all right. I enjoyed
The glass thing's great too. Yeah, we just left it up here, we didn't take it to you because it was.
I got how Rudy does it all the time. Bless her heart.
Archie, why don't you take it? I don't want 25 Thank you so much. Well, I already have a bill to bill.
Same way. Rita, and I think she's gone, oh Rita, she's on the corner there. Glad you guys came today.
Now I'm not working, it's a little bit hard.
Yeah, we weren't sure what time it started. And, well, they get here between 11:30 and 12. We have lunch, usually we have it for waitress and she's very efficient.
Yeah.
But, and then the speaker always is from 1 to 2.
Okay, good. So we were about right, because we weren't really sure. We left home like 11:20.
Yeah, you're fine.
This was good, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Did you turn our, we have our badges? Oh, yeah, if I keep going, he's like, because of all that.
I got her.
I have no idea. I've had a lot of damage, and I never really had it fixed.
Actually, I'm meeting with, I will. We're doing a presentation.
Well, I may,
Yeah, because usually what happens, is that and I had more than one, and I know what you're talking about, so he got.
Thanks for laughing at the appropriate time.
Oh, you're welcome. Every year.
keep us grounded, so we can get all.
Right now.
I think that's